June 28th, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated in Sarajevo. You've been told the single bullet triggered World War I, that a Bosnian nationalist gun started the conflict that killed 17 million people. They lied to you. The war didn't start with an assassination. It started decades earlier with steel rails, loan contracts, and a railway line stretching from Berlin to Baghdad. The real trigger wasn't a Serbian teenager with a pistol. It was German engineers laying track across Ottoman territory. It was British bankers panicking about losing their monopoly on Middle Eastern logistics. It was French investors collecting interest on Ottoman debt. World War I wasn't about nationalism or Archduke revenge. It was about who controlled the transportation corridors, who owned the infrastructure, who collected the tolls on global trade routes. Empires aren't conquered with armies anymore. They're conquered with balance sheets, debt contracts, infrastructure projects that look like gifts but function as nooses, railways that promise connection but deliver extraction. This is the story of how train tracks killed an empire and started the bloodiest war in human history. They told you railroads were gifts of civilization, infrastructure investments to modernize backward nations, steel arteries connecting people and prosperity. The march of progress on iron wheels. Propaganda, every word of it. Look at British India, the crown jewel of empire. Miles of railway track crisscrossing the subcontinent. Impressive engineering, supposed development. Except look closer at the map. The railways don't connect Indian cities to each other in any logical pattern. They don't link manufacturing centers to markets. They don't facilitate internal trade or domestic commerce. They connect resource extraction points to ports, cotton fields to Bombay Harbor, tea plantations to Calcutta docks, mineral deposits to coastal shipping lanes. The railways were built specifically to extract raw materials and ship them to Britain as efficiently as possible. This wasn't infrastructure for India's benefit. This was a logistics system for imperial extraction. Every rail line was a vein draining wealth from interior to coast to London. And here's the beautiful part for the colonizers. They made India pay for it. British investors financed the railways with guaranteed 5% returns. If the railways made profit, investors collected. If the railways lost money, the difference came from Indian taxpayers. Risk socialized to the colony, profit privatized to the empire. The railways couldn't lose for British capital. They couldn't win for Indian subjects. Latin America saw the same pattern. United Fruit Company built extensive railway networks across Central America. Connecting what? Banana plantations to Caribbean ports, taking bananas from interior farms to ships heading north to American markets. The rails didn't serve local populations, didn't connect Guatemalan cities, didn't facilitate regional trade. They were conveyor belts moving agricultural products from exploitation zones to export terminals. This is the infrastructure trap. Foreign capital offers to build railways, promises development and modernization, delivers extraction infrastructure that serves external interests while generating debt that serves forever. The tracks aren't gifts, they're needles injecting themselves into the veins of nations. And what flows through those needles isn't prosperity, it's wealth extraction and permanent debt. The Ottoman Empire understood this too late. By the time they realized what was happening, the trap had already closed, mid-1800s. The Ottomans are struggling. The Crimean War drained the treasury. The empire is vast, but administratively inefficient. Europe is industrializing, and the Ottomans are falling behind technologically and economically. The solution seems obvious. Modernize, build railways, install telegraph lines, update the military, create infrastructure that matches European standards, become competitive through development. There's just one problem. The Ottomans don't have the capital to fund this modernization, so they do what developing nations always do when they need money for infrastructure. They borrow from European banks. The loans seem reasonable initially. Interest rates aren't usurious. Projects get built. Railways start connecting Istanbul to the provinces. Telegraph lines span the empire. It looks like progress, except the infrastructure doesn't generate the expected economic returns. The railways don't stimulate enough commerce to pay for themselves. The modernization doesn't create productivity gains sufficient to service the debt. But the interest payments don't stop. They compound. The Ottomans borrow more to pay interest on existing debt. The classic debt spiral begins. Borrow to pay debt. Borrow to pay the debt on the borrowed money. Each cycle making the situation worse. By 1873, the Ottoman government was spending 50% of total revenue just on debt service. Half of everything the state collected went to foreign creditors before a single domestic expense was paid. Before military salaries, before administration, before anything. This is mathematically unsustainable. You cannot run a state when half your revenue disappears to foreign bondholders. Eventually, the numbers stop working. The ability to pay vanishes. The choice becomes default or collapse. 1875, the Ottoman Empire declares bankruptcy. Cannot service its debts, defaults on foreign obligations. The first major sovereign debt crisis of the modern era. But this isn't like personal bankruptcy. When a person goes bankrupt, creditors lose. When a state goes bankrupt, creditors take control. 1881, the Decree of Muharrem. The Ottoman Empire signs away its sovereignty without a shot being fired. The decree establishes the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. Sounds bureaucratic. Sounds like reasonable debt restructuring. It's actually a foreign occupation disguised as financial management. European creditors, primarily British and French bondholders, gain direct control over Ottoman revenue streams. They take over customs collection, tax farming, revenue from salt, tobacco, alcohol, fishing, stamps, the most reliable income sources of the empire. The Ottoman government no longer controls its own finances. European bureaucrats sit in Istanbul collecting taxes and sending money directly to foreign creditors. The empire's budget is managed by representatives of its debt holders. This is conquest without armies, occupation without invasion. The Europeans accomplished what they couldn't achieve militarily in the Crimean War. They took control of the Ottoman state through debt contracts and financial administration. The empire still has a sultan, still has a government, still has an army, but the treasury belongs to foreign creditors. The ability to spend money, the fundamental power of statehood, is gone. And this is where the railways become weapons. Because while the Ottomans are financially occupied by British and French creditors, Germany makes a move. The Baghdad Railway, Berlin to the Persian Gulf, German engineering, German capital, running through Ottoman territory, connecting Europe directly to the Middle East without going through British-controlled sea routes or the Suez Canal. This is an existential threat to British imperial logistics. Britain's power rests on controlling sea routes in the Suez Canal. All trade from Europe to India and Asia goes through British-controlled waters. This railway bypasses that entirely. Germany offering the Ottomans what Britain and France took away. Development capital, partnership instead of debt slavery. Infrastructure that serves Ottoman interests, a way out of European financial occupation. Britain panics, France panics. Their financial control over the Ottomans is threatened by German infrastructure investment. Their monopoly on Middle Eastern trade routes is broken by a railway line. The assassination in Sarajevo gave them an excuse, but the war they'd been preparing for was already inevitable. It wasn't about Serbian nationalism. It was about who controls transportation, who controls logistics, who controls the trade corridors that define imperial power. World War I was a railway war, a fight over infrastructure, a conflict where the real battlefield was Ottoman debt and German trains, not trenches and machine guns. Fast forward to today. Think the game changed? Think we learned lessons from Ottoman bankruptcy and imperial railway wars? Think infrastructure lending is now benevolent development aid? Meet China's Belt and Road Initiative, the largest infrastructure project in human history. Hundreds of billions in loans for railways, ports, highways across Asia, Africa, and beyond. The pitch is identical to 1850s European loans to the Ottomans. We'll build your infrastructure, develop your economy, connect you to global trade, partnership for mutual prosperity. The execution is identical to British railways in India. Build infrastructure that serves Chinese interests, create dependencies that benefit China's logistics and resource access, generate debt that transfers control when countries can't pay. Sri Lanka learned this, took Chinese loans to build Hambantota Port, couldn't service the debt, handed the port to China on a 99-year lease, Chinese control of a strategic Indian Ocean port, paid for by Sri Lankan debt. Pakistan learned this, massive belt and road investments, growing debt burden, increasing Chinese influence over economic policy and infrastructure control. The railways are being built, the trap is closing. Dozens of countries across Africa and Asia are in similar positions. Chinese infrastructure loans, growing debt, questions about their ability to repay. The pattern is repeating with mathematical precision. The names changed, the trains got faster, the documentation got more complex, but the game is identical. Lend for infrastructure. Create debt, leverage that debt for control when payment fails. Use railways and ports as tools of financial occupation. We're watching the Ottoman playbook run in real time. Except instead of European bondholders and Ottoman bankruptcy, it's Chinese creditors and Belt and Road debt. The mechanics are identical. The outcome will be similar. Because infrastructure isn't development when it primarily serves the lender's interests. Railways aren't gifts when they're funded by loans that transfer sovereignty. Progress isn't progress when it comes with terms that make repayment mathematically impossible. So here's the question nobody wants to answer. When foreign capital builds your infrastructure, are you developing or are you being developed? When the railways come with loan contracts, are you gaining transportation or losing sovereignty? The Ottomans thought they were modernizing. They were actually selling their treasury. Sri Lanka thought they were building ports. They were actually leasing territory. Every nation taking infrastructure loans believes this time is different. This time the development is real. This time the partnership is genuine. The tracts say otherwise. The debt contracts tell the truth. Infrastructure financed by foreign loans always comes with strings. Those strings are nooses, and the noose tightens exactly when you can't pay. World War I didn't start with an assassination. It started when Germany laid tracks to Baghdad and threatened British financial control of a bankrupt empire. 17 million died because of railway logistics and debt contracts. The lesson wasn't learned. It's being repeated. Different trains, different empires. Same trap. We follow the money to show you that borders aren't drawn with blood. They're drawn with loan agreements and railway concessions. Now I want to hear from you. Is infrastructure built with foreign loans a tool of development or a weapon of financial occupation? When a nation cannot repay railway debt, does the lender own the trains or the country? Drop your answer in the comments. Development or occupation?